afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome back to our CWS seminar. Today we have a guest from far away from India, Professor Kapil Gupta and his wife. They are currently visiting the UCL. Kapil is a visiting professor at the Leverhulme visiting professor at the UCL, but he's coming from the IIT Bombay, and we've been working with him for a very long time, back to 2010 in the EU project Corfu, and so it's been it's been a long time. We haven't seen him because the pandemic. Yeah, so it's very happy to have him and his wife back to Exeter, and so he's going to share with us with his recent work on the flood disaster management.
Thank you, Albert. So once again, thank you, Albert, Slobodan, David, in organizing this seminar. And I am so happy to see you again. After 2010, the Corfu project that we worked together. Nice to see you again in person, although we have seen each other on VCs several times. Good afternoon to all the other scholars in this room. And in this brief presentation, I'll try to give an overview of what we have done. Initially, I'll begin with some of the basics so that everybody is on the same level. So first part is just on the recent incidences and possible solutions. Second part will be on the studies that we have carried out in Mumbai and for India. And third part would be described on what we are attempting to do as part of the research for the Leverhulme funded fellowship. So as Albert mentioned, I am here at University College London on a Leverhulme visiting fellowship for 1 year. So I'll be here till August. So our focus is on mitigating urban flood disasters under a changing climate. As you all know, So I arrived here last September. So in the past 6 months, I have seen that UK has been hit by 10 storms. Agnes, Babette, Sharon, the list is there. And I think the Sharon storm caused a lot of flooding, disruption, damages, disruption in transport, ferry services, road, rail, air, all were disturbed. The lorry turned over, trains were of course disturbed. What was significant was there was a loss of power supply due to damaged power lines in Scotland. And I read in the newspapers that wind speeds of to 300 kilometers per hour were prevalent. So that is becoming a fresh challenge to us. And it is reported that even the operations at the nuclear site were shut down for some time. So that again has implications for power supply. And as we were discussing today morning, that if the power supply fails, then your communications may also fail. And once you're out of communication, how do you rush the emergency supplies and the manpower to the affected sites? Because no communication, you don't know what's going on. That is a big challenge. And of course, lives have been lost in each of these cases. Then coming to the flooding this is not unique to UK. We have seen flooding worldwide. Last week, there was flooding at Dubai airport. Flights were disturbed. And it is reported that it got 254.8 millimeters in 24 hours. Highest since recording started in 1949. And you might have seen on the news and videos the disruptions caused at Dubai and United Arab Emirates or the Oman and other Emirates as well. And this is nothing new. Last year, New York got 226 millimeters at JFK airport, wettest since 1948. Auckland, New Zealand, again 240 millimeters, so 200 plus seems to be the new norm in terms of extreme disasters. Sydney, 170. London is still not on the list. Let us pray nothing happens to London. Mumbai, of course, we got 944, which I will be describing later on. So the data reveals that we are seeing exceedances of all previous data in many of our cities. And if we look at the data from India, so this is the data of 2021, and many of these cities, if you ignore the names of the cities, look at the numbers. The rainfall in 24 hours. So we've got more than 200 millimeters happening in many more towns and cities. And these are cities which have population of more than 100,000, most of them. So a lot of people are affected. So what we are witnessing is that due to extreme rainfall, the number of people affected is increasing because more and more people are migrating to urban areas. And that is where, so we have to, even a small area affected will cause inconvenience to a large number of people. So that is what we need to plan for in the future. And another important observation that we have seen in India is that India receives mostly monsoon from the east side, from the Bay of Bengal depressions. So 95% of the weather systems come from the Bay of Bengal. The cyclones or hurricanes, they come from that side. But in the past 5 years, we have seen 3 cyclones originating in the Arabian Sea. And Mumbai has been affected, and we have received 330 millimeters of rainfall from Cyclone Topte. And even Delhi received 120 millimeters in 1 hour. So obviously, at the moment, the categorization is anything more than 204 millimeters is extreme rainfall. So we really need to have another classification above that. Say, let's call it catastrophic rainfall for 350 millimeters plus rainfall. So otherwise, anything more than 200, we say it's extremely heavy rainfall. And when we want to use it for planning purposes, we can identify another term which takes into account the higher rainfall. And this was the comment made in the introductory editorial of the special issue on urban flood resilience by the Royal Society. So Dick Fenner, he started saying we are facing a climate emergency, and which is what we have seen: rising global temperatures in the UK, intense weather patterns, unregulated development, increase in impermeable surfaces, and of course exposure of urban populations, which cause economic losses and loss of livelihood, especially to the people who are working on a day-to-day basis. This is a figure which most hydrologists are familiar with. Before urbanization, we had a lot of water going into the ground. There was a groundwater recharge taking place. Surfaces were undeveloped, so most of the water flowed freely, and there was no flooding and a lot of groundwater available. But with increased urbanization, the groundwater recharge has decreased. And those of you who have been to Bangalore this year, Bangalore is facing an extensive water crisis. They are thinking of asking people to go away for the holidays because there's just no water. And on the contrary, the channels have reduced in size due to increased urbanization. So we are seeing more paved surfaces, more runoff, but less space available for the water to flow. So this has a double-ended effect that the flooding has increased from 3 times to up to 9 times after development. So as we all know, the whole exercise is bringing the hydrograph from here to back here. And the measures that are recommended are the sustainable urban drainage measures that we have seen described in various places. So the problem is simple. We say that, okay, there is a downstream flooding happening. Everybody says, let's increase the size of the drains. Let's provide more drainage paths. But in urban areas, the areas are already overdeveloped. There's no space for increasing the size of the pipelines or the size of the drains. So obviously we have to look elsewhere. As you see in this particular figure, this was the original size of the drain 100 years back when the cities were small. And with increased flows, this will be the hypothetical size of the drain that would be required. But obviously it's not possible because you have already cities and services on the ground. So it will be costly, severely disruptive, not effective unless fully implemented, and space is of course not available. So we examine the mitigation measures that are possible. They are classified into non-structural measures and structural measures. Non-structural measures include sensors for rainfall, water level and flow measurements, for triggering alarms and alerts for pre-threat thresholds to the urban population. Structural measures are the sustainable urban measures. So let us have a look at them one by one. So before describing this, just a quick note that Mumbai faced 944 millimeters of rainfall in July 2005. At that time, there were no weather stations in Mumbai. They had only 2 conventional weather recording devices. which was read manually on a graph paper by a person going onto the rooftop at 8:30 in the morning. By the time they worked out the calculations at the graph, the results were known only at 12 o'clock in the afternoon as to what was the rainfall the previous day. So when this flood happened, that was the status. The authorities, the planners, the disaster managers, they had no idea as to what was the actual intensity of rainfall. So 60% of Mumbai was flooded. About 465 people lost their lives, 10,000 cattle were washed away, and a lot of infrastructure damage was there. The airport was shut down for 3 days, railway tracks were washed away, so communication breakdown, there were mobile systems were down for more than 12 hours, people commuting spent the night on the bus stops, and so on and so forth. So following that, we were called by the municipal corporation to help them advise them what is the next best thing to do. So the easiest thing was to set up an early warning system. So we advised them to put up automatic weather stations on the top of their fire stations. So in the first phase, we put up 30 automatic weather stations. Now, with a passage of time, now there are 170 automatic weather stations all over the city. So this figure shows the location of the original 30 weather stations at each of the fire stations. And this console shows the data that you can get, temperature, humidity, rainfall intensity, and so on. And in Mumbai, we found that whenever the rainfall exceeds 40 millimeters per hour, it induces flooding. So these were calibrated to give an alarm at 40 millimeters per hour rainfall intensity. We also put an ultrasonic flow gauge on the Methi River of Mumbai. So that gave us the water levels in the river. And we provided them support for the first 5 years. Now, of course, it has been operated by the Indian Meteorological Department and the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. So now the system is available online. This is the site. So if you go to this site, it works only during the monsoon because remaining 8 months there is no rainfall whatsoever. Rainfall happens last week of June to middle of September. So for the 4 months that the system is operation, this is the type of data that you get. You see all the rainfall values are now represented by a color code. All the rainfall stations, you can see the data on the graph. So this is a particularly severe event. This is on 16th August. So you have rain is happening uniformly over the city between 90 to 100 millimeters per hour on that particular 24-hour event. So for Bombay, we see that Bombay gets around 2,500 millimeters per year. And most of the rainfall happens during the monsoon, and 50% of this happens in July and August. And out of that, 50% of that happens just in 2 or 3 events when the monsoon system is active from the Bay of Bengal. So each event like this, we get around 2 or 3 events individually which exceeds 200 to 300 millimeters per event over 24 hours. So this is one step. So first of all, you alert the people. Whereas compared to 2005, there was no system whatsoever. So now there's a system in place. And now other cities are also replicating the system. So Chennai, Guwahati, and Hyderabad, they are also installing automatic weather stations to at least get an idea as to the amount of rain that is happening. Coming to structural measures, these are the sustainable urban drainage practices which we have been talking over for the past 20 years. And of course, they are known by different names in different countries. US, they call them best manmade practices. Australia, they call them water-sensitive urban design. China, they are calling them sponge cities. But it's the same concept, whatever name it is. So infiltration, percolation, porous pavements, rooftop storage, parking area storage, on-site detention, inline detention. So we'll have a quick look at these. And recently, the new civil engineer also said that plans to make such mandatory from 2024 should be welcomed. So if it's made mandatory now, at least the new developments would have these measures. And I think today, over lunch, we were discussing that we should put in rainwater harvesting tanks to store the water from the rooftops. I mentioned that in another slide. So green roofs are now being made mandatory. In Portland, they have made it obligatory that whatever ground cover is lost due to the construction of building, that much cover has to be provided on top of the building. So in effect, what it means is that the ground below, it does not know that a building exists on top of it. So whatever recharge was existing before the construction of the building, same recharge is now happening on top, from the top of the building. And then you can leak the water through gutters and drains all around the building through the drainage system. So this is one solution which works well, but it is possible only in new buildings. The present houses, they are quite old and their roof systems may not have been designed to take the extra load of water. So for future new constructions, this is a very exciting prospect. Excuse me. And depending on the amount of rainfall, it can provide relief to the cities from 1% to up to 50%. Then the other challenge which we have seen is that roadside ponding because of water accumulation of the roads. One of the main reasons for roadside ponding is impervious pavements and lack of adequate inlets or gutters. And this has of course caused heavy runoff and flash flooding. And in one of the World Bank projects that we did for the city of Amritsar in Punjab, this is what we found was the situation. Obviously not a very happy sight, either for the businessmen or for the people walking on the footpaths. So the solution is of course simple, provide porous pavements. And the American Society for Testing Materials describes a porous pavement, one with a porosity and permeability high enough to allow water to readily pass and significantly influence hydrology, routing habitat, and other environmental effects. So two basic designs are there: asphalt or concrete pavements lacking finer aggregate, and modular interlocking open cell cement blocks laid over coarse gravel base. So typically only 15 to 25 void content is possible from loading considerations. So these figures show the two types. So they provide, this is quite aesthetic. You have a surface hard enough for the car to support itself, as well as green areas for the water to infiltrate. So this type of aesthetic parking places provide a good solution. One of the other things which I have noticed on my walks in London is that most of the trees are recklessly paved all around. So the trees are growing and the pavements are all uneven and unsteady and difficult for people like us who tend to trip over. And I think this permeable resins around the trees, it is a good environmental solution both for the trees as well as for the foot walkers. Then the rooftop rainwater harvesting has been suggested, and of course it is possible for roofs with flat roofs. With sloping roofs, maybe we might need a slightly different solution. So water can be stored on top of the roof, or at the ground level, or underground level. So you can have three different positions for the roof depending on the type of house you have. Here, there are two different examples from two parts of the world. One is from India and one is on the other side in Brazil. And the solutions are quite simple, quite basic. What you can see is water is led from the rooftop into a gutter pipe. Then you have a tank and the water goes into the tap system. This is a public toilet on a highway, at the center highway. And this is a house in Brazil. Same system, water from the roof goes into the tank and the water can be used for non-potable purposes. And there are several books on rainwater harvesting which show the basic configuration. You have a collection, and what is most important in the systems, we need to have a first flush rejector so that the first flush of leaves and other things can be washed out before it goes into the tank. Otherwise, it's a very simple design and very much replicable in all parts of the world. So after we presented it to the government of Assam after the Guwahati flood, the Chief Minister immediately announced that they are going to subsidize provision of 1,000-liter tanks for a majority of the population in the city of Guwahati. And then this is what David has presented in his earlier studies. And I use this to give the example that in the catchment which you studied, 100 liter provided 11% reduction in overflows, whereas 1,000 liters provided reduction up to 43%. So theoretically, if every house provides 1,000-liter tank to store the water coming on its rooftop, so if all the houses do that, so instead of 5 feet of water on the road, I would have 4 feet of water because all this water would have been stored and it can be released after the storm is over. So obviously this needs to be worked out, how much is population. It would be catchment specific, it would be rainfall intensity specific. But every little measure adds, and if we implement all the measures simultaneously, instead of 5 feet of flooding, we can bring down the levels to less than 2 feet, which is much more manageable for the common public. Then this is another example from Japan. So these are tennis courts, about 10 tennis courts there. And what you need to see is this is the steps leading from the clubhouse down here. So this is during dry weather when people are enjoying a game of tennis. But when it rains, the entire tennis court converts into a detention basin. And it serves a dual purpose. So if you have flooding 5 times a year, you can play tennis the remaining 350 days. And I'm sure that everybody will be happy that instead of the water coming into their houses, the water has only flooded the tennis court. So we have in Mumbai, there was no space available for the detention tank. So what we provided was we designed the online detention basin on the Methi River. So this was the Methi River which caused the excessive flooding. So after the Mumbai 2005 flooding, a huge 6-meter wall was constructed on a flood wall was constructed on the Methi River for around 10 kilometers. And the commissioner at that time, when he visited China, he called it the Great Wall of Methi, which of course it does not at all compare with the Great Wall, but still it is a first in its own sense for the city of Mumbai. Now during dry weather, most of the sewage goes into the Methi River because there is not adequate sewage system. So this is raw sewage flowing in the summer during the dry weather period. This is all raw sewage, so water passes through the orifices below the weir here. And when it rains heavily, the weir functions as a mini dam. And here we have 3,000 cubic meters of storage during the severe rainfall event. So this provides detention, and we have 2 such detention basins. So we have around 6,000 cubic meters of storage. And it provides a relief of around 15 minutes in terms of travel time, which is adequate to issue warnings for the people on the downstream to evacuate in case of severe rainfall and flooding. Then the other challenge is that when no space is available in the city, where do you construct the underground holding tank? So in Hong Kong, they had a similar problem. They said that if they were going to replace the existing drainage systems, it would have taken 10 years and it would be 7 kilometers long. It would cause a lot of disruption, which was not possible. So they took the next challenge. They constructed a huge underground detention basin under the football field, and once it was complete, they restored the football field. And this is the Tai Hung stormwater storage tank. It has 100,000 cubic meters of capacity. Similar tanks were constructed in Barcelona, which I think we saw last time. They have around 9 underground tanks of similar capacities. And this has become quite common in other parts. Tokyo also they have done this. After this, in Mumbai also we have constructed 2 detention ponds to release the flooding in the low-lying areas. I described that in the later part of the study. So coming now specifically to Mumbai, I've already described the rain gauge system for Mumbai, which issues real-time alerts. So I'll quickly go through these 4 case studies: the flood alert system, the flood risk assessment, the decision support system for flood forecasting, and the airport culvert widening after the 2005 floods. So this is Mumbai. It's basically an island. The area is only 437 square kilometers, but we have a population of 12.48 million, and the average density is around 20,000 people per square kilometer. And as you know, it rained 944 millimeters 24 hours. At that time, we had a high tide of 4.48 meters. That was the highest high tide of the season, which obviously prevented the water from draining into the sea. And this shows the hydrograph of the rainfall. As you can see, we had a 193 millimeters in 1 hour and 700 millimeters in 7 hours. So this is the average rainfall in the city, 120 millimeters per hour for the first 4 hours. And obviously we had water all over the city. Mobile phones failed, air, road, rail failed. People were stranded in trains, buses, loss of 469 lives, 16,000 cattle, and of course other severe losses. So this is the Methi River, which contributed to the flooding. This describes the catchment, Methi River. So it has 3 lakes on top of it, the Tulsi Lake, a small lake, a Vihar Lake and Powai Lake. But when the flood happened, none of the lakes were overflowing. So the rainfall essentially happened in the catchments down here. And or there was sufficient capacity, but the lakes did not overflow. And this is the profile. It's a very shallow river. It's just 25 meters of sea level here for the first 8 kilometers. Then for the next 8 kilometers, it's more or less, it's a tidal river which has been reclaimed from the sea. So after this huge event, the municipal corporation decided that they will develop a disaster risk management master plan for Mumbai. But they said, why only floods? Let us look at all the disasters. So we had a core committee which looked not only at floods but also at earthquakes, oil spills, terror attacks, beach collapses, fires. So all the disasters were included. The relevant experts were called, and we contributed to the flood risk assessment study. And because it was a short-term project, everything had to be given within 3 months. We carried out a rapid assessment. This, of course, we have published in the IHS volume. So since the detailed data was not available, we used the SRTM digital elevation model, generated the contours, delineated the catchments, identified the catchments contributing to the wards, got the rainfall data, computed the runoff volume, got the drainage characteristics, calculated the inundation depth, got the flood spread, and what the planners were interested in, what is the population affected. How do we prioritize which of the wards would need more attention than the other wards? So this was the ultimate aim of the study, was to prioritize the wards and the populations affected. So for example, to give the highlights of the results, we considered 2 rainfall amounts. One is 50 millimeters per hour and the other is 100 millimeters per hour. So the flood spread for 50 millimeters per hour was worked out like this, and for 100 millimeters was this one. And for each of these, we worked out the flood spread in square kilometers and the flood spread as a percentage of the catchment, population affected in terms of numbers, and population affected as a percentage. So this helped the municipalities prioritize which areas they need to focus on. And in this figure, we have identified there are 24 wards, A, B, C, D, up to R. So RC is R North, R Central, R South. And from this, you can see that the ward E was the most affected in terms of flood spread. And second was ward N. But when we look at the population affected, the ward shift, we have HE ward. So in this way, the municipalities could now focus all their important resources to positioning the manpower, the fire rescue services and the other services in these 2 wards as compared to other wards. So this was the key, one of the key actions that the municipality was able to take. Then so after that, when we got the automatic weather stations, we had all this live data coming in every 15 minutes. So we made an attempt to see whether we could use this data to forecast the flood levels in the Mithi River. So to cut a long story short, one of our PhD students, Nikam, he also worked on the Kofu project. So he developed a rainfall forecasting methodology using support vector machines. And we found that it could predict 15 minutes ahead, okay, but for 20 minutes to 30 minutes, the accuracy went down significantly. And we were able to issue forecasts for the municipal corporation. So data sources, the data were available from the manual readings taken by the municipal staff. And for the study, during the heavy rainfall period, the students also sat down and calibrated these readings for this study. The longitudinal profile and cross sections were available from the corporation. We made a model on the HECRAS model using HEC HMS and HECRAS software, freely downloadable from the US Army Corps of Engineers. And we calibrated the model with the observed values and the simulated depths. And this is what we got. And we got the rating curve for the Mithi River as well as the runoff at the gauging sites. And we simulated the overflows for various cases. And after calibration, it took less than 5 minutes for the simulation with the computers at that time. And we were able to forecast the water levels for the Mithi River. And it worked well for a flooding event of 14 July 2009, and we were in constant touch with the municipal authorities for working out whether to evacuate the people or not. So this flood level forecasting worked well during that event for the time we were in touch with the corporation people. And this describes the overall flow chart of what I've just described. We have the rainfall, we have the HEC model, we have the catchment runoff, we have the river geometry. That is the model development and the application. So at the end, we have flood alerts and flood warnings going out to the public. And the results were communicated to the important authorities in the city, the municipalities, transport authorities, railways, airports, police, traffic police. Attempts were made to inform the citizens also through SMSs. We had a big discussion with the mobile companies, and the main issue was who would pay for the SMSs being generated. Even though it cost them only a fraction of the amount, they still wanted to get every penny from the government for their transmission. So this is where these are some of the issues which are non-technical, but they need to be resolved when we are looking at the city-wide disaster management plan. Okay, now airports are a critical infrastructure, and in view of what we have seen at Dubai Airport and New York Airport, we have been emphasizing to the government that no matter what happens, the airport is, in today's world, the airport is the main point of communication, emergency relief, and we have all been affected by delayed flights, whether it's the flooding in Dubai or anywhere else. So any delay in one airport has a knock-on effect for all the other flights all across the world. So in this picture you see this was the culvert that had existed before 2005, and because this was having less capacity than what it rained upstream here, the airport flooded and it was down for 3 days. So subsequently we carried out flood simulations and detailed studies for the airport, after which we determined the size of this new culvert. This is 460 meters long this way, and this is 12 meters by 4 meters each. So you have 48 meters and by 8 meters cross section down here. So this took some time to study. I'll describe the study. So once again, emphasizing airports are critical infrastructure. We need the airports. Last year, Chennai airport was flooded. The planes, even the emergency planes could not land. So the National Rescue Force, they had to land at an airport 60 kilometers away and then travel by road to Chennai. So it took them 3 hours. So in terms of rescue and relief, it was a major handicap. And even the helicopters cannot land because if there's water on the airport, you cannot land a helicopter. You can only pull up people. And so we have made it a clause in the National Disaster Management Guidelines that it is most important that you have to have efficient drainage for the airports for a much higher rainfall intensity. And again, we wanted to put in, you have to put in for a 1 in 100 year event rainfall, but there was stiff opposition from some of the sectors, so we simply had much higher rainfall intensity. We are now revising the urban flood guidelines. This year again a committee has been set up, so after 10 years. So taking into account the recent incidents of flooding both in India and world over, so we are now going to increase the thresholds, and hopefully it is slated to be completed by March 2025. So we have started working on it. This time we have got a UNDP team also on board. So hopefully we should have the experience of the UNDP team also into the guidelines. Towards this, we are also planning to have national level workshops, consultation with the cities which have been affected by severe flooding in India in the next 6 months. So coming back to the Methi River, that is the only river in Mumbai which caused the flooding. So this is how the airport looks. This is the main runway. The river goes under the runway here. And this I have already mentioned, 190 millimeters in 1 hour. And this was the damage caused. So the same methodology, we had the catchment data, we had the precipitation data, we used the HEC HMS because we found it worked well for the earlier studies. We used the river geometry, bridges, culverts, analyzed the HECRAS, worked out the water levels for various scenarios, and we looked at the contributing catchments from to the lake. for each of these subcatchments. We worked out various combinations for various flow scenarios. And so in the first stage, we said that we will simply widen the culvert, but the airlines pointed out that then their large aircraft would not be able to take off because they needed this extra length of runway for taking off. So we had to redo all our calculations, and the solution that came was that you have a curved culvert under the runway. It increased the costs, but it made the runway available for international services. And since this was an open cast construction, it took 1.5 years to complete this. And so this was completed in 2012. So we have two box culverts, going back, button. Yeah, so we have two box culverts of 12 meters width, 460 meters length here, which I showed you in the first picture. And this is how it looks now. This is all underground here. So the original culvert is retained, and after that, I'm happy to inform you that there has been no flooding of the airport due to the overflowing of the river, because the culvert that we have provided is adequate to convey the flows. Although the flights have been disrupted due to severe inclemental weather, due to high wind speeds, but not due to the flooding of the airport. What we did is, so we have designed it for 120 millimeters per hour for 3 hours. So even if you get 360 millimeters in 3 hours, the airport is not going to flood. After that, we had a severe flooding in the railways in 2020. And as we were discussing this morning, the railways do not seem to care what happens to the city. They are only concerned that their railway track should keep functioning no matter what happens to the city. And as we know, that is not possible because everything is interconnected. The drains flow under the railway tracks. But the railways, and of course, because of the severe, let us say, human relationships, the railways work with the central government, whereas the city are the local officials. So there have been a lot of discussions, polite discussions between the two. So then in 2020, the railways got severely flooded. At that time, the minister insisted that we carry out the analysis and give solutions for them. So we carried out an analysis, and with the criteria that we are not going to get either the city involved or anybody else, the solution would be for the railways, by the railways, within the railways. So we looked at the entire traffic stretch, the entire railway tracks within the city. And to cut a long story short, we identified areas which the railways had within their premises, and we found that there were two large patches which were not being used by the railways, and we said that they should construct detention ponds, underground holding ponds of 36,000 square kilometers area here, and 16,000 square meters here, and 37 square meters here. And this can be of any depth from 2 meters to 9 meters, depending on what they wanted. So there was stiff opposition from the railways. They said, no, we cannot spare this land because we want to develop a railway station. We suggested to them that you can have the underground pond, and on top of that you can build a 100-story railway station if you like. So we have submitted the report to the government. The event is over. It's been forgotten. And as we were discussing, when the next big flood happens, I'm sure they will dig out the fires and look at it again. So that report we submitted just before coming over to London. So it's a work in progress, if I may say so. On a parallel front, we have been working with University College London for the past 3 years on developing education course curriculum for disaster-related infrastructure. So in the first phase, we developed a course outline for one of the undergraduate programs. In the second phase, we trained the teachers in India on what the course curriculum was, what it contained, and how they could incorporate it and merge it with their ongoing curriculum. And in the third phase, we are now got an industry partner, and we are now going to interact with the industry partner to see how the industry can find some of this curriculum useful and upgrade it to suit the industry. Then, as a part of the research fellowship, we are aiming to develop a multi-hazard risk-informed early warning system for critical infrastructure. So Because of the airports and railways interaction which I had earlier, we thought we'll focus on the airports and railways. Subsequently, in the past 1 year, we were informed by our Disaster Management Authority in India that please have a look at communications also, because in the last Chennai flood, communications was down for 6 hours, and they had no ways of interacting or knowing what to do, how to do, where to do, because the information was not coming in. So we have now reshifted the focus to power lines, communications, and then railways and airports. We also tried to set up a consultation with the nuclear board here to see if the nuclear, because the Sellafield facility was shut down, but they said that no, it's classified, we can't share the information with you. So we'll then develop a conceptual model and see how it goes. We also submitted a research proposal for listening to the Ministry of Earth Science and UKRI. That's just submitted. So to conclude, what we are seeing is that the past rainfall is no indication of future severe events. What rainfall should we design for? Should we just take the past maximum because it can happen again? That is again a decision which the local authorities have to take. In view of the increasing dependence on outside help for a city, we need to have mechanisms, infrastructure which will withstand severe rainfall, especially the airports. Then we need to improve the drainage facilities of critical infrastructure, railways, airports, and hospitals. We found that in Chennai, many of the hospitals had their emergency generators installed in the basement. Obviously, when the basement flooded, unfortunately, in one of the hospitals, 60 people on life support could not make it through because the generators failed. So hospitals are equally critical for during disasters. And of course, all this can happen only if we have disaster-related infrastructure engineering curriculum in our courses, so that the next generation of students coming into the mainstream, they have a feel, they have an awareness that this is an important issue to be tackled in the future. And finally, we have to revise our drainage manuals. State of Florida, they revise the drainage manual every year. They sit down in September. By December, everything is documented. On 1st January of each year, the manual is available for everybody to be downloaded. So I refer to this for the latest information. And they have around a 200-page manual, and they have got a 864-page detailed supplement for that. So let me be honest, I have not been able to go through all the 864 pages, but we do flip through the important bits. So thank you for your attention. If not, enjoy the flooding. These are some of the publications. And this is the official UAE government, 254.8 millimeters. That's the only thing I could read. Thank you. Questions, please.
Yes, questions? Gupta?
First of all, thank you very much for the interesting lecture. Looking at the layout of that additional culvert under the airports, what I did not get is why it was going around so much, because a longer and curved culvert would have reduced capacity compared to a straight one. So what was the reason for that?
So So the takeoff length for the large aircraft, they require a longer length of runway length to take off. So if this was the length available, the large aircraft just did not have enough takeoff length. So they had to come right to the end of the runway here to build up the takeoff. So this extra 100 meters here was necessary. Otherwise, they just did not have adequate takeoff length.
But was it not possible to have it under the runway?
Is
it not going under the runway anyway, or not?
No, but the construction was open cast. They had to dig up the runway also, because they could not have a cut-in, they could not have a box culverts under the runway.
Tunneling was not an option?
Tunneling was not an option.
Okay.
So it was open and cut method.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why it had to be shifted to the end of the runway. So once this was, so from here they could have the full threshold for takeoff. especially for 777s. Otherwise, the 777 just could not take off and land. And this was a 1.5-year operation, so it would have led to loss of business, loss of traffic, and other things. It increased the cost, increased the length of the culvert because it's now in arch, but it was financially viable for the airport. Yes, David.
Kapil, thank you very much for the presentation. As you were talking, I was thinking about sustainable drainage systems, and obviously you talked through those in Indian conditions. During the monsoon, are they going to make any difference at all?
Not for the existing cities, but for the new developments. The new developments now they are talking of nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
So over the past 1 year, I've been on the government committees for funding 7 cities to the tune of 50 million pounds for 5 years. So 7 cities are Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Pune, Guwahati, and 2 more, Hyderabad. So in that, we have made it compulsory that 50% of the funds should be spent on sustainable drainage systems and nature-based solutions. And if they don't have that 50% component, you are not going to get the funds.
Okay.
So at least they've started thinking of it, and it's now being related to the funds, that if you don't have it, you don't get the next improvement funds. So they're forced to think about it.
Which is good. But I think we just have to be a bit careful, don't we, that we don't overpromise what they can do.
Yeah.
A lot of simulation work we've done shows that for small and medium-sized storms, yes, they have a significant positive effect, positive effect on flooding and overflow of CSO. But for large storm events,
they won't be able to handle it.
They won't.
I agree.
So it's not an either-or, is it? If you're really concerned about big events,
I think
still need structural measures as well as non-structural.
Absolutely. So I think no system can handle these extremely heavy events, the ones which we have seen 250 millimeters in an hour. But I think it's the repeated events. So if you have 5 events, out of which 4 are moderate events, so instead of 3 feet of water, I will have 1 foot of water, which is more manageable on a day-to-day basis. I don't have to shut down the schools. Because now the immediate reaction which most of the cities are doing is, if there's a heavy rainfall forecast, shut down the schools. Okay. So we are seeing increasing shutting down of the schools in many of the cities in the past 5 years. So whenever the Met Department says there's going to be heavy rainfall, first step is shut down the schools so that children are not affected, parents are not disrupted, the parents are not worried mentally. So that itself, I think, it makes people a bit more happier and don't move out unless necessary. So I think that is the first reaction. Then, as you rightly said, no amount of such can solve the extreme events. And I think that is because of over-urbanization, increased populations.
Sure. But that's where your warning systems come in, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can't stop them, but at least you can tell your population about it.
We can tell them to stay indoors. I think that's the bottom line, So, again, there are lots of unanswerable questions because these are the challenges. The biggest challenge that we have been facing is the failure of communications. Mobile phones come down. You cannot rush the emergency supplies. Helicopters cannot land because there's no landing place for a helicopter. All the open fields are now, once an open field gets flooded, the helicopter cannot land because soil is too soft. If it lands, it will just get stuck. So these are some of the situations that we have encountered when looking at India as a whole. And as I mentioned, so we want to put many of these feedbacks and comments into the new guidelines, which we are going to work. But again, the guidelines are there for somebody who reads them. So, and as we see the practicing engineers in the field, they are so busy with the other tasks that, so we are suggesting that we will have a 2-page SOP which can be pasted on the wall for everybody. So that's the idea at the moment. Thank you. Any other questions?
There's an online.
Oh, yes.
And online. So, Dave, would you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you. Professor Gupta, thanks for your presentation. It was very informative. I have one question. Have you come across any events where you had flooding, but the Mithi River did not overtop. Is that a concern?
Can you repeat the last part, please?
My question is like, are there events of flooding where the Mithi River did not overtop,
In Mumbai?
but there were isolated pockets where
Lower
there
Parel,
was,
Lower Parel and Dadar are not linked to Mithi River. They get flooded because they are developed in low-lying areas. Lower Parel is a saucer-shaped area, and that is where they have put the holding pond now with pumping systems. And that is, at the moment, it is under design. It's designed only for 50 millimeters per hour, whereas what we need is something with 100 millimeters per hour. So other parts of the city which are not connected to the Mithi River still get flooded because they are located in low-lying areas. And in recent past, lot of new developments have taken place in the low-lying open areas, which were earlier old mill compounds. So a lot of real estate has come up. Some of them have not built adequate drainage systems. They are still sizing on the old value of 50 millimeters per hour, whereas after the 2005 flooding, the Chitale committee had recommended 100 millimeters per hour. Thank you.
okay, thank you. And so one follow-up question I have is that in such scenario, do you have any comment regarding what will be the utility of a rain over grade distributed parameter model, where it does not necessarily assume that there is a river which flows through the town and you get flooding when it overtops.
But if you don't have a river, then how will you get the flooding?
No, I mean saying like it can be just because you are getting large runoff and there are some local areas which are at lower elevation and water is getting accumulated there.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of interest nowadays in like rain over grid model, with more improvements in computational efficiencies. So
No,
I was just wondering if you have a comment regarding that, whether
I
there
think
is a utility of such models in such scenarios.
my observation with most of the models is you can improve the results and output by say 5%, 10% through better modeling. But if you don't have space on the ground for constructing any of the mitigation measures, no amount of modeling is going to help you. You have to have space on the ground to implement your mitigation measures as a result of the modeling studies.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is about, I noticed you use the rainfall predictions to make the flood alarm in your presentation. And what's the threshold for this rainfall? And also, I noticed this flood alarm was made at around 2014. And what's the threshold now? And how do you consider the climate change when you make this alarm?
Okay. So for Mumbai, what we have done is the committee had recommended 100 millimeters per hour. We referred to the DEFRA report, which said that there's a 20% decrease for climate change. And at that time, they said, where is this 20%? They thought it was off my head. So I said, look, it's in the DEFRA manual. So after that, we were able to design from 100, we increased to 120 for climate change. And now there is an increased awareness of climate change in India. So now the Ministry of Earth Sciences has now been renamed as the Ministry of Earth Science and Climate Change. So now we have got a full ministry looking after climate change. And Vijay here, she's also on the Committee of Climate Change from the ministry. So hopefully it's her job now. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes.
Pankal?
Yeah, you mentioned smart cities in China, which has been developing in the last 10 years. Smart cities.
Sorry.
You mentioned
Yeah.
smart cities in
Yeah.
China. So, in the last 10 years, the Chinese government has invested quite a lot, basically following a top-down approach. With the central government, local government, a lot of fundings. I don't know what's the current, the system with the, in India with the SaaS or nature-based solutions. I wonder what kind of approach do you think India need to achieve wide adaptation of
I think I understand your question.
Yeah.
So one thing which I noticed between China and India, the rainfall intensities are significantly different. Beijing is around 600 millimeters per hour per year annual rainfall. The rainfall in Beijing is only 600 millimeters per hour approximately.
Per year.
Per year, yeah. And other parts of China also get around 1,100 millimeters per hour. Whereas Indian cities, we are getting double that. So our approaches are different in the sense that, and what David said rightly, the sustainable drainage measures will work only up to a certain rainfall. Beyond that, they will not work because we just don't have the capacity, or the amount of areas required for those measures would be extremely large and it may not be financially viable. So when we compare China and India, of course, China also has different varied geography and India has different varied geography. But from my understanding, the rainfall intensities of the monsoon are much more than what you get in China. Except for maybe the hurricanes that you get in Hong Kong, which are severely disruptive. But I don't think other parts of China have got those severe hurricanes which you get in Hong Kong. I'm not much aware of what's happening in China, let me be honest.
I think in southern China, I think the rainfall also quite high. So over, I think probably not 2,000, but in some parts, over 1,000, 1,500. But the smart city, has been implemented across China, from north to south.
Yeah.
I wonder, in India, obviously, it's huge. So in some regions, the nature-based solution also encouraged.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, the 7 cities that have been given funding from the central government, in that we have insisted that 50% of the funds should go into nature-based solutions. So now what they will do is, the municipal corporations, they will hire consultants who are supposed to give them what are the nature-based solutions applicable in the particular catchments which they are going to take up under the scheme. So ultimately, at the moment, our role is just advisory, and it is the consultants who would provide the solution. And when they give the reports, it will be our role to tell them, look, you need to improve this, you need to make this more viable. And that is the way I see the things are going to go forward. So it has started in these 7 cities, and in the second round, they are planning to take up 7 more cities. And of course, the cities have to give a proposal, only then the government considers. So government has sent out an invitation to the other cities, please give a proposal for this much funding. So that is a slow process, but this is how our government works.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope it was useful.
Any final questions?
John, you have any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you. I'm sure I'll have loads, but...
Ask at least one.
So,
Yeah.
final one. So
Yes.
you mentioned about this underground tank
Yeah.
that developed in other cities. So when you are going to implement this, are you going to also enhance the drainage network within the cities?
For Mumbai, it will be difficult because Mumbai is an extremely complicated drainage systems, and most of it is hardly 4 meters above sea level. So the present solution which we have envisaged for the railways is that you have a huge underground tank, and it will store the water for the 3 hours, 360 millimeters of rainfall. And once the rainfall is over, you pump it out to the existing drains when you have a low tide. So that is the proposal, and it is a tides as a 12-hour cycle, so they will have only 6 hours to pump it out when the tide is receding. So that is what we have suggested. And present government practice is that they take the opinions from the universities, but when it comes to implementing the things, they want to hire consultants. And then once the consultant gives the report, they again ask us for their comments, and then it's revised. So it's an iterative process, and over maybe 2 or 3 iterations, they come out to an implementable solution. And that's based on the experiences of the local railways also, depends on what they want, how they want to address it, because they are the authorities who are going to fund it. So obviously they have the final say. So ours is mostly a advisory and analytical role in this present process.
Okay. So I'm way over time because we have some field trip to visit, so we need